You have to tell, this is a Chamber of Commerce thing. You have to tell us your name. You got to tell us what company you're from, and then ask your question.
Everybody knows me. I'm Jim, the video. Oh, you knocked on my door 100 years ago when I was in Plainsboro. You're a brave man. I'm a Republican, and you were in a Democratic thing, and I did vote for you.
We stop there. We're great. Next question.
Your relationship with Governor Christie, if there's one, if you don't want to answer it, I understand. And do you have a relationship with any of these people with Calvin? Did you ever find out what happened to Calvin?
Okay, great question on both parts. The first part is, if you didn't hear it, the question is, do I have a relationship with Governor Christie? I've seen him once, maybe twice, and we had a polite conversation. And let me tell you why, and then I'll answer your second half as well. I had to make a decision when I showed up. Every person that goes into prison has to make a decision. You have one of two decisions. And people I was in Loretto with, there were people who made both decisions. You either, all the rocks, all the boulders, all the anger, all the betrayal, all the feelings of hurt, you either carry them around or you put them down. And I just made the decision. I'd had 6 years of carrying boulders around. I was not going to let 6 more years go by. So I was not going to, and others made a different decision, who would walk around the track or be there angry every day, and it made what I thought was going to be 18 months even longer. So my answer is, I've seen him a few times. It was polite. I'm not going to carry anger around towards anybody. I don't just mean to him, towards anybody. But your second question, have I stayed in touch with people like Calvin? Absolutely. I will take many of the people I served in prison with over some of the people I worked in politics with. They're more honest in prison. And they stab you in the front. I have actually. One of the things I'm doing now is helping other people that were incarcerated. And I was in this weird position. You know, if you're a federal inmate, you serve time in federal prison, and you go to a halfway house, and you have at least 1 year, sometimes many years, of probation. And during that period, you can't talk to anybody you were incarcerated with. But I had this weird situation that I was no longer a felon. And I was a lawyer again. I got my law license back. So all of a sudden, I could talk to people that I served with. I could talk to people who were still inside. So I was able to help people like Calvin. And this list, just last night, Bob and I were talking about this before, a guy who sat at our table, a guy named Preacher, nicknamed Preacher, Otis his real name, from South Florida, just got out. And I talked to him last night. He's still in a halfway house. And we talked about what he's going to do next. The very thing I enjoyed doing when I knocked on your door in Plainsboro and thousands of others across the 7 towns in my district, to talk to people, to help people, I get to keep doing that. It may not be as a senator, but let me tell you, the life difference I've been able to make is worth every second. Great question. I know I saw it. Yes, please.
Thanks. Great talk. My question, by the way, superchat please.
Great.
My question to you is, when you get into prison, what do you see as some of the changes that would be good to have in your experience?
In the prison system. It's a great change. The question is, what changes do I think we should have in the prison system? And I'll give a couple. One inside and one outside. Inside, we all say the same thing. I teach prison law now at Seton Hall Law School, right? And we tell ourselves that people make mistakes and they get convicted of crimes or they plead guilty. And we send them to prison. But when we send them to prison, we want to rehabilitate. We all hear we're going to rehabilitate people. We're going to go to prison, we're going to rehabilitate, because 97% of criminals, I use that word on purpose, 97% of criminals come back to the community. So we want people to come back to the community, rehabilitated, and maybe better than they went in. That's why we make people take GED, or we teach adult continuing education classes. But my experience is that's pretty much where it stopped. You didn't have lots of job training. You didn't have lots of classes. We take people and we lock them up and they come home. And we wonder why we have recidivism. Right? We had an auto tech program at Loretto where I was. And it had been 8 years since anybody in the program had ever passed the auto tech course. We were warehousing people. Right? I'm not saying things that people did are okay. I'm not. Some of the things people did, like mine, weren't criminal. But people, everybody in this room makes mistakes. Some people get prosecuted for them. But as a society that believes in mercy, I just don't think you take people and lock them up and do nothing while they are there. So the first thing I would do is, and I think one of the few bipartisan things that happened in the Trump years was the First Step Act, which gives credit to people who are in federal prison for taking classes and working. Right? That is a good step forward. And both the Democrats in Congress and President Trump deserve credit for that. It's making people's lives better. But the other thing we need to do is what happens when you get home. When you get home. Right? We tell people, you serve your time. We all say it. You served your time, you can come home. Now, I'm a guy who 7 years of higher education, whatever, law degree, win in the Supreme Court. I was going to get a job. Lori Danko promised to hire me. I knew I was going to get a job. But you're my friend Ralph from the Bronx, who I was in Loretto with, serving a jail sentence, 5 years or something for drugs. You get out and businesses won't hire you. Companies won't hire felons, even if what they did had nothing whatsoever to do with what the business does. You can't get a job. Right? People have trouble getting how about this, getting a bank account. Right? The number of people I have spoken with, I would say it's 100% of people I've served with have difficulty getting a bank account. No, not me, right? What? No. The United States Supreme Court ruled 9-0. 9-0. That I had not committed a crime. I have been a banker since I was 1 year old. My father had me open a bank account at First National State Bank in Trenton when I was 1 year old. I still have the passbook. I have been a banker at First National State, First Fidelity, First Union, Wachovia, now Wells Fargo, for 49 years. Last December, I opened an IRA. Last Friday, Wells Fargo wrote me a letter saying we're closing your account because of Bridgegate. We're going to work it out. I'll go to another bank. I'm a guy the Supreme Court found innocent. I'm a guy who doesn't have a record. You're Ralph from the Bronx or Calvin from Detroit. Good luck. Thousands and thousands. I'm not talking about people who committed bank fraud. Thousands of formerly incarcerated people can't get a bank account, which means you can't get a lease for an apartment, which means the paycheck that you're getting, you're going to a check cashing agency. That's not mercy. And quite frankly, it's not a system that works. Because what happens if you can't get a bank account, and you can't get a job, and you can't get an apartment? What's open left to you to repeat crime? So I'm sorry for the long-winded and passionate answer, but I have talked to people every day who can't get an apartment, can't get a job, can't get a bank account, and yet we say to ourselves, this is a good system. It's not. Great question. Next, please. Please.
Did you find that there were any common themes amongst inmates on how they got there? And I don't mean the type of crime, but extenuating circumstances in their lives that was consistent, that would help with preventative programs?
It's a great question, but is there common links between, regardless of the type of crime that were committed? So in a prison camp where I was, where Bob was, you can't have any violence. So anybody who committed a crime of violence or had done violence while in prison can't be in a camp. So maybe perhaps the people I was surrounded by may not be truly representative of everybody in the federal prison system, or the state, certainly states. But so I'll give you some commonalities. The education system is failing. When you've got 25% of the people in federal prison and 40-something percent of people in state prison that don't have a high school diploma, we're failing our kids. Kids who have no other choice. Then we fail them when they're in the prison system, going back to the question we had before. There was a guy that we served with who begged not to be sent back. When you leave, they send you to a halfway house, right? He begged not to be sent back to a halfway house in the city he was from, because he knew the world he had come from he's going to fall back in the past. He begged to go anywhere. I remember him saying, he said, Phoenix, Arizona. He was from the East Coast. Phoenix, they sent him back to his hometown. The common theme is people make mistakes, terrible mistakes, big mistakes, who commit real crimes and have a punishment system we have to fulfill. But why is every other Western nation do it better than us? Because we just give up on people sometimes. And it's not a system that's ever going to work. Thanks for your question. Yes, please.
I'm Dr. Joan Coleman, and I wondered, I believe that everything happens for a reason, and you said you were told it was okay like 3 or 4 times. Now, thinking back in retrospect, would you go back? Would you do it again? Not Bridgegate so much, but
No, I wouldn't do that again. I can assure you. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that wouldn't happen again.
but going back to help people, like, you know, the little people, because when you're a politician, you're probably up here helping the higher ups and big businesses, but helping the smaller people, the people who are in trouble, the people who don't get served like they should, would you go back and do that again?
Well, I would say, somewhat your question, great question, thank you. I think I tried when I was in office to do that. You know, I spent a lot of time with people, politicians, especially because door to door. I knocked on 20, 30,000 doors in my career. I loved that, talking to people on their front porch and helping people. So I love that. I think part of being in politics, and Councilwoman, I bet you see this as well, and Commissioner, you see it as well. You know, sometimes you go to things like this is really important. It's really important to keep going to the local community events and volunteering. And I tried to do that in office. But yeah, especially when I was at the Port Authority, I was dealing with the Queen of England, right? And it was important for me to keep, and Kristen knows this, I kept doing volunteer stuff even when I was at the Port Authority. But what Bridgegate and the going to prison reminded me of is what I sort of talked about before, of why I did it. Meeting people like Calvin and that's why we do it. So I think every one of us in public life, and I don't mean public life like elected officials. Everyone in this room's in public life. You own a business like Peter, you're in public life. You run a nonprofit, you're in public life, right? We all have that. And this room, this organization has historically, since when Kristen was here, always been committed to that kind of involvement with the community. We need everybody else to do that too. Thank you for your question. Over here, please.
My name's Howard Cohen. Is there some kind of network that you're part of that if people who have been released from jail, and I would say are from upper echelon of society, that have gotten together to help those in need who are coming from the South Bronx, where your dad is from, and other places that really could use your help and could use the help of people who are more educated and from a better socioeconomic place?
Thank you. It's a great question. Yes, there's a number. There's one called the White Collar Support Group, which is not just for white collar people. People are getting ready to go into prison. It's one of the things that I've been doing is helping people prepare to go into prison. Both people who are, you know, a lot of people that are out on bail waiting to get sentenced or whatever, you know, whether it's Medicare fraud or tax fraud, bridge fraud, helping those people out. But also teaching, teaching students, that helps. And actually started a not-for-profit with my friend Gordon Kaplan. Gordon was one of the people who was caught up in the college admission scandal. He went to Loretto for 28 days. I helped him get ready to go in. He came out. We now work together. We partner together. And there's a group we started called the Prison Visitation Fund. Remember I told you how important visits are for people who like breakfast buffets. The visits are really important. But there were people I served with whose families could not afford the bus ticket to come visit them. Right? Because in state, if you're in state, you're going to go to a prison. If you commit a state crime, you're going to go to prison in the state. But in federal, they can send you 300 to 500 miles away from your home. I was 300 miles away. Lots of families can't afford that, right? So we started a not-for-profit to raise money to help families who can't afford to go visit their loved one, because the statistics of reintroduction into society, people who've stayed in touch with their family in the period of time that they are incarcerated, overwhelmingly different when it comes to success. People who've had visits, people who haven't had visits, people who've had visits and stayed in touch with their family, overwhelmingly do better when they come home. So we started a not-for-profit. It's called the Prison Visitation Fund. This is not a pitch. I mean, please feel free to donate. prisonvisitationfund.org. Hal says he's going to fund it personally. So, but that's the kind of thing you have to. That's the kind of thing you really do that I've been able to do. So, great question. I've been told. Hal tells me one more question, please.
Daryl with Comcast Business. Two-part. I support your father.
Me too. Would you like him? You can.
Let me qualify that. I've been in media a long time. Yeah. I had the pleasure of staying at that same hotel in Altoona, and the breakfast is great.
Would you not provide him more? I'm going to hear this every holiday. Remember that guy at your speech said I did the right thing at the breakfast buffet? The waffles were great.
So can you elaborate just a little bit more about the education?
Yeah.
And are they required, or is there additional benefit if they get their GED, if they get an education, then shorten their time? Is there some additional benefit to encourage them?
There is now. The question is there, these classes that I talked about in GED, is there a benefit to doing it other than just sort of doing it? So it has changed since I was there, thanks to the Congress and President Trump's First Step Act. Anyone who doesn't have a high school diploma under federal law has to go and attempt to get the GED while they're there. We also did adult continuing education classes while we were there. Bob taught some, I taught some. We started a Shark Tank, right? So you had like sort of white collar guys who'd like some business guys, and you have people who were trying to start a business. I remember one friend, Stroman, wanted to start an auto detailing business when he got out, which he now is. And we set a Shark Tank up, and he got to pitch his business, and we did things like that. Some of the adult continuing education classes were time fillers, right? It was like, let's go learn about art, and we should have these videos. I have to tell you a real quick true story. I'm sorry, Hal. My first adult continuing education class was a Friday night. First one. And about 20 or so guys would show up with a video, and it was a series. It was like one of these PBS series. It was like 30 straight episodes of the greatest architectural feats in world history. And the first week, I'm sitting in the back. Let's just sort of learn. I'm sitting in the back. And the video was about the George Washington Bridge. I'm like, really? What has changed is you now get credit. So for every day of classes or programming that you take, you get additional time in home confinement. So you get out of prison earlier, which lets you get back to your family earlier, which lets you get back to working earlier. So the classes, you're starting to have more classes. It's actually something I've been involved in. There's a not-for-profit group called Interrogating Justice. I sit on their board, which has been working with the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice to promote classes. Just last week, there's about 300 programs are covered. One of them is not covered, called MINT, which is a program for women inmates who are pregnant to be able to stay with their newborn for a specific number of months. And the Bureau of Prisons was not giving credit for that, for early, as part of the early First Step Act. So we were able to get involved and be involved and help that. So that's what you get out of it. That's the classes that you get out of it. So Hal's giving me the sign, so Bobby, I have to apologize. Real quick, Bob, real quick.
My name's Bob.
And by the way, when's the last time you had two felons speak at your lunch? Go ahead, Bob. Real quick, Bob.
I will. I'll make it real quick. I just want to say, when I got interviewed with the psychologist in the pre-entry, she looked at me and she said, they have a whole bunch of questions they ask, and she says, have you thought about getting married? And I looked at her, I said, are you interested? Anyway, Billy, I'm listening to you speak, and you've touched upon everything that we both went through. And I couldn't, I could sit up here for an hour and say the same stories you did. One thing I do want to say to make it quick is that being involved in the education with the inmates, you know how difficult it is to get the recidivism down because these people have a very difficult time. But speaking here in the Chamber of Commerce, I would like everyone to realize that you should take the opportunity to go to a halfway house or an occupational center and try and hire inmates and put them into a business. Before I went away, I used to hire inmates from occupational centers and let them weld or do things that were in my business. So as business people in this room, you should leave this room thinking about going to they're called occupational centers, they're halfway houses, and to hire these people because, like you said, it's very difficult for felons to get jobs, apartments.
That's right. Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Bob, very much. That's right. So I want to, first, two things. I'll be very quick. I want to say thank you for listening because people don't often listen to people who are locked up. There's voices, I'm lucky. There's a lot of voices aren't heard, so I want to say thank you. And I also want to get a round of applause. I don't see anyone here. But, we come to these lunches, we come to these get-togethers, and we have these wonderful lunches. But the people who do these lunches for us, who run back and forth across the tables and run back and forth and get our lunches, and this group, Farag, Jennifer, Jose, and Norma, who've been coming back and forth, let's give them a round of applause for the work they do. And I just want to say again, one last time, Hal's going to call on you, Councilwoman, or I'm going to get in trouble.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm Denise Daniels, and I'm also from United Way, Greater Mercer County. And what you just said, we support a group it's called Work Well, and Work Well works with folks coming out of incarceration. And and we have had them at the Rotary and some other places. So they're local here, so if anybody is interested in getting more involved in helping inmates, come see me or email me or talk to me, and I will help get you connected to them.
Thank you for all your work. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
I don't want to follow him at all, ever, I think. But Bill, thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. And honestly, in the greater Mercer area, nobody better than the Chamber to have their ear to the ground during your entire ordeal. You had a lot of support, a lot of hearts were with you, a lot of people knew that you were innocent. So thank you for being here.